70-year-old man is arrested without cause, but when the police discover his true identity, they are left speechless. But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. The fluorescent lights in the Boston precinct buzzed faintly as Detective Jack Turner reviewed the day's cases. Most were mundane, petty thefts, domestic disputes. But then came Henry Brooks, arrested near Beacon Hill for suspicious behavior. The old man had stirred curiosity. Henry, a wiry figure with silvery hair neatly combed back, sat calmly in the interrogation room. His worn brown jacket and faded loafers suggested a life of modesty. Yet his composed demeanor, piercing blue eyes, and a peculiar air of dignity told another story. Jack watched him through the one-way mirror. "What's his deal?" Jack muttered to Officer Ramirez, who stood beside him. He didn't resist, didn't fight. No ID, no phone. The only thing on him was this, Ramirez replied, holding up a leather-bound pouch containing a vintage pocket watch. Jack inspected it closely. The watch was immaculate, its golden casing gleaming despite its age. Engraved on its back were the words, "To HB with eternal gratitude." Jack frowned. What kind of vagrant carries something like this? Inside the room, Henry showed no sign of concern. He sat upright, his hands resting gently on the metal table. When Jack entered, the man looked up with an almost imperceptible smile. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," Jack began, seating himself across from the elderly man. "You've had quite the eventful night." Henry nodded but said nothing. Jack leaned forward. "Care to tell me what you were doing at Beacon Hill at 2 a.m.? Why you don't have any ID?" Henry's voice, when it came, was measured and soft, tinged with an accent Jack couldn't quite place. "I was enjoying the quiet, detective. As for identification, let's just say I prefer not to carry it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That's not how it works here, Mr. Brooks. You're not making this easy." The man simply smiled again. "Sometimes, detective, the hardest path leads to the most enlightening destination." Jack exhaled sharply. He'd dealt with his share of eccentrics, but something about Henry gnawed at him. Pulling out the pocket watch, he placed it on the table. "Care to explain this? Looks expensive." Henry's smile faded slightly. He picked up the watch with a reverence that bordered on worship, his fingers tracing the engraved letters. A token from another time. A gift from someone important. Before Jack could press further, Ramirez opened the door abruptly. "Detective, you need to see this." Out in the hallway, Ramirez handed Jack a printout. It was an image of the pocket watch, identical in every detail, including the inscription. The document labeled it as belonging to a celebrated yet enigmatic World War II operative known only by the initials HB, presumed dead in 1952. Jack's pulse quickened. "This watch shouldn't exist," he muttered. Ramirez nodded, his face pale. "That's not all. I flagged it in the database, and we've already had a call from someone claiming federal authority. They're coming for him." Jack glanced back at the interrogation room, where Henry Brooks sat serenely, as if waiting for the next move in a game only he understood. "Oh, who the hell is this guy?" Jack whispered to himself, gripping the report tighter. Whatever answers lay ahead, one thing was clear. Henry Brooks wasn't just an old man. The precinct buzzed with tension as Detective Jack Turner paced the hallway outside the interrogation room. The arrival of federal agents had been swift and unrelenting. A pair of sharp-suited men introduced themselves as Agents Carter and Reynolds, flashing credentials with enough authority to make the entire station snap to attention. "We'll take it from here," Carter had declared curtly. But Jack wasn't the kind to back down easily. "Hold on, this is my case. Who is this guy? And why is the FBI so interested in him?" Jack pressed, folding his arms. Reynolds shot Carter a sidelong glance before responding. "Let's just say Henry Brooks is a person of historical significance. We need him in federal custody immediately." Jack wasn't buying it. Historical significance. He was found loitering on Beacon Hill with no ID and a pocket watch. Hardly sounds like a national security threat. Carter leaned in, lowering his voice. Detective, this is bigger than you realize. Stand down before you get caught up in something you can't handle. Jack's jaw tightened as the agents pushed past him into the interrogation room. Through the one-way mirror, Jack observed the encounter. Henry greeted the agents with a faint smile, but his body language grew more reserved. "Mr. Brooks," Carter began, "we need you to come with us, now." Henry studied them carefully, his hands clasped on the table. "And where might you be taking me?" "Somewhere secure," Carter replied. Henry chuckled softly. "I see. Tell me, Agent Carter, how much do you truly know about me?" Carter stiffened. "Enough to know you don't belong here." Henry's calm demeanor cracked for the first time, his voice carrying an edge of defiance. "Then you know less than you think." Jack couldn't take it anymore. He burst into the room, ignoring the glares from the agents. "Enough games. What's going on here?" he demanded. Carter turned sharply. "Detective Turner, you're out of your jurisdiction." "Maybe. But I don't like being kept in the dark, especially when it's happening in my precinct." Jack looked directly at Henry. "Talk. Who are you? And why does the FBI care?" Henry's eyes met Jack's, and for a moment something passed between them, an unspoken understanding. "Detective," Henry began, "if you truly wish to know, then I suggest you follow me when they take me away. That is, assuming these gentlemen don't detain you as well." Carter slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough." But Jack wasn't backing down. "I'll be damned if I let you drag him out of here without knowing why." The standoff was interrupted by a call over the precinct's intercom. "Detective Turner, urgent message on line 2. Reluctantly, Jack stepped away to take the call, but his frustration mounted as he listened. It was a journalist, a local history enthusiast, who'd heard rumors about Henry's arrest. The reporter claimed that Henry Brooks' name matched a legendary intelligence officer whose exploits during World War II were shrouded in secrecy. Hanging up, Jack's thoughts raced. The pocket watch, the initials HB, the federal interest, it all pointed to something massive. But before he could return to the interrogation room, the agents were already escorting Henry out, flanked by 2 armed guards. Henry glanced back at Jack as they reached the precinct door. His expression was calm, but his eyes conveyed a warning. "Don't let this go." Jack felt a surge of determination. Ignoring protocol, he grabbed his coat and followed them into the night, his mind set on uncovering the truth. As he tailed the convoy of black SUVs through the city streets, Jack's gut told him one thing. Whoever Henry Brooks was, he wasn't just a relic of the past. He was the key to a story that could rewrite history. The convoy of black SUVs glided through the darkened streets of Boston, headlights cutting through the misty night. Detective Jack Turner followed at a safe distance in his sedan, his grip on the steering wheel tight as questions swirled in his mind. Who was Henry Brooks? And why did the FBI care so much about him? The convoy finally came to a halt outside a nondescript federal building on the outskirts of the city. Jack parked a block away, slipping into the shadows to avoid detection. From his vantage point, he watched as the agents escorted Henry inside. The old man moved with the same calm dignity that had baffled Jack from the start. Determined to get answers, Jack waited for the agents to disappear before approaching the building. Flashing his badge at the front desk, he claimed an urgent need to speak with Agent Carter. The receptionist hesitated but eventually allowed him access, perhaps intimidated by Jack's no-nonsense demeanor. Inside, Jack found himself in a sterile conference room. Moments later, Carter stormed in, his irritation palpable. "Detective Turner, you're skating on thin ice here. What are you doing?" "Cut the crap, Carter," Jack shot back. "I want answers. Who is Henry Brooks, and what are you hiding?" Carter hesitated, his composure faltering for a fraction of a second. "This is classified, Turner. You're in way over your head." Jack stepped closer, his voice low but forceful. "Maybe I am, but that man was arrested in my jurisdiction, and I'm not leaving until I know the truth." Before Carter could respond, the door opened and Henry himself stepped in, flanked by 2 guards. He seemed unfazed by the tension in the room. "Detective Turner," he said with a faint smile. "I had a feeling you'd find your way here." Carter glared at Henry. "This is highly irregular." Henry waved off the remark. "Perhaps, but there's no harm in enlightening the good detective, is there?" Jack crossed his arms, his eyes locked on Henry. "Start talking." Henry nodded, taking a seat at the table. The guards shifted uneasily, but didn't intervene. "I was born in 1921, Henry began, his voice steady. "By the time I was 20, I was working for the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to what you now call the CIA." Jack blinked, caught off guard by the candor. Henry continued, "During the Second World War, I was part of a covert unit tasked with some of the most delicate and dangerous missions in Europe: sabotage, intelligence gathering, infiltration. We did it all. My code name was Sentinel." Jack's skepticism flared. "And I'm supposed to believe you're some kind of wartime super spy?" Henry smiled faintly. "Believe what you will, but history often leaves out the inconvenient truths. After the war, my work wasn't done. I was recruited into an even more secretive program, one that dealt with unconventional threats to national security." Jack frowned. "Unconventional how?" Henry hesitated, his gaze momentarily distant. "Let's just say there were things we found, technologies, artifacts that defied explanation. My team was tasked with securing them, keeping them out of the wrong hands. It was a life of secrecy, deception, and sacrifice." Carter interrupted, his tone sharp. "That's enough, Brooks. He doesn't need to know more." But Henry ignored him, leaning forward to address Jack directly. 2 decades ago, I disappeared. Officially, I'm dead. But the truth is, I've been living off the grid, protecting a final piece of intelligence that, if revealed, could destabilize entire governments." Jack's mind raced. "And now someone's after you?" Henry nodded gravely. "Yes. Enemies from the past have resurfaced. They've discovered I'm alive, and they want what I know. That's why I went to Beacon Hill. I was supposed to meet an old contact, a last attempt to pass on my knowledge before it's too late." Before Jack could process the implications, an alarm blared throughout the building. Carter barked orders into his radio, his face pale. "What's happening?" Jack demanded. Carter's expression was grim. "We've been compromised. Someone's coming for him." Henry stood, his posture unyielding despite the chaos. "It seems the game isn't over yet." Jack's instincts kicked in. Whatever this was, it was bigger than anything he'd ever faced. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. The shrill alarm echoed through the sterile corridors of the federal building, its red strobe lights casting ominous shadows on the walls. Jack Turner tightened his grip on his service weapon as chaos erupted around him. Agents scrambled to secure the premises, shouting orders into their radios. "Lock down all exits," Carter barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "No one gets in or out." Henry Brooks remained eerily calm in the storm of activity. His weathered hands rested lightly on the table, his gaze fixed on Jack. "Detective Turner," he said quietly, "it seems you'll have your answers sooner than expected." Jack shot him a look. "What the hell is going on, Henry?" Henry's voice was steady. "They found me, and they're here to finish what they started decades ago." Before Jack could respond, a thunderous explosion rocked the building, sending a shockwave that rattled the windows. The lights flickered, then plunged the room into partial darkness, leaving only the pulsating glow of the emergency strobes. "Everyone move!" Carter yelled, gesturing for his team to take defensive positions. "We're under attack." Jack pulled Henry to his feet. "You're coming with me," he said firmly. Henry allowed himself to be guided, but his expression was resolute. "You'll need more than that pistol, Detective." As they moved through the chaos, a squad of armed intruders stormed the building, their movements precise and coordinated. Dressed in tactical gear without insignias, they carried advanced weapons that Jack didn't recognize. The air crackled with tension as the invaders neutralized the first wave of federal agents with ruthless efficiency. "Who are these guys?" Jack demanded, dragging Henry behind cover. "Mercenaries," Henry replied, "hired by those who want what I've protected for years. They'll kill anyone in their way." A group of intruders rounded the corner, their laser sights sweeping the hallway. Jack fired 2 precise shots, taking down one of them. He turned to Henry. "You'd better start explaining what they want, or we're not making it out of here alive." Henry nodded grimly. "Decades ago, my team and I recovered something extraordinary. A piece of technology unlike anything the world had ever seen. It's a weapon, but also a source of power. We buried it deep, but someone has unearthed its location, and they think I know how to activate it." Jack's breath caught. "And do you?" Henry didn't answer immediately, his silence confirming what Jack feared. "We have to keep moving," Henry said instead, motioning toward a service stairwell. "They'll be here any second." Jack cursed under his breath but followed Henry's lead. Together, they descended the stairwell, the sounds of gunfire and explosions reverberating above them. Henry moved with surprising agility for a man of his age, his every step deliberate. Reaching the basement, they found themselves in a maintenance tunnel. Jack swept his flashlight over the narrow space, checking for threats. "Where does this lead?" "To the outside," Henry said. "If we're lucky, it hasn't been compromised yet." "Lucky isn't exactly the word I'd use," Jack muttered. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the tunnel, followed by the metallic clatter of grenades being tossed. "Run!" Jack shouted, pulling Henry forward. They dove around a corner just as the grenades detonated, the blast sending debris and shrapnel raining down. "Detective," Henry said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "There's a safe house nearby. If we can reach it, I can show you the full scope of what's at stake." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way." As they emerged into the night through a hidden hatch, Jack spotted the remnants of the federal building behind them, smoke billowing into the air. The mercenaries hadn't followed yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. Henry adjusted his tattered jacket and looked at Jack. "You have a choice, Detective. Walk away now, and this will all be forgotten, but if you stay, you'll never see the world the same way again." Jack met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "I didn't sign up for this, but I'm not letting you face this alone. Let's go." With a nod of approval, Henry began leading the way. The city's quiet streets seemed to hold their breath as the two men disappeared into the shadows, carrying with them the weight of secrets that could reshape history. The safe house was an unassuming brownstone tucked away in a quiet corner of Boston's Back Bay. Its exterior gave no hint of the fortified interior, where steel-reinforced walls and state-of-the-art surveillance equipment awaited. Jack Turner followed Henry Brooks through the door, his nerves taut as the older man entered a passcode on an inconspicuous panel. The room lit up with a soft hum, revealing shelves lined with files, maps, and photographs that spanned decades. In the center stood a table covered in papers, alongside a digital console displaying schematics too complex for Jack to decipher. "This," Henry said, gesturing to the room, "is my life's work, and my burden." Jack scanned the room, his eyes settling on a faded black-and-white photograph pinned to the wall. It depicted a younger Henry, standing beside a group of men in military uniforms. Behind them, a cargo plane bore the insignia of the OSS. "That's your team?" Jack asked. Henry nodded solemnly. "We called ourselves the Sentinels. Each of us swore an oath to protect humanity from threats it wasn't ready to face." Jack pulled the photo closer, noticing the hard-set expressions on the men's faces. "And what exactly were you protecting us from?" Henry exhaled deeply, sitting down at the table. "During the war, we stumbled upon something extraordinary in the Ardennes forest, a device buried deep beneath the earth, older than recorded history. We called it the Beacon. Its capabilities were unlike anything we'd ever seen. It could manipulate energy, rewrite the laws of physics, and if weaponized, bring entire nations to their knees." Jack shook his head, his skepticism bubbling to the surface. "You expect me to believe this? A magical doomsday device?" Henry's gaze hardened. "I don't care if you believe me, Detective. What matters is that there are people out there who know it's real and are willing to kill for it. The Beacon was buried in an undisclosed location after the war, and only a handful of us knew its true coordinates. I'm the last of them." Jack's mind reeled. "So these mercenaries, they think you'll lead them to it?" Henry nodded. "And they're not wrong. But what they don't realize is that activating the Beacon requires more than its location. It needs a specific sequence, a failsafe designed to prevent its misuse. That knowledge dies with me." A sudden pounding on the front door shattered the tense silence. Jack drew his gun, motioning for Henry to stay behind him. The pounding grew louder, more insistent, until the door exploded inward, scattering debris across the room. Mercenaries poured in, their weapons raised. Jack fired off several shots, taking cover behind the table as Henry ducked low. The attackers' advanced armor absorbed most of the bullets, forcing Jack to aim for vulnerable joints. "Henry, we need an exit!" Jack shouted over the gunfire. Henry crawled to a hidden panel on the floor, pressing a sequence of buttons. A trapdoor slid open, revealing a tunnel. "Go!" he urged. Jack fired a few more shots before grabbing Henry and diving into the tunnel. They slid down a narrow shaft, landing in a dimly lit corridor. The sound of gunfire and shouting echoed above them as they sprinted toward the tunnel's exit. Bursting into the open air, they found themselves in an abandoned industrial yard. Jack scanned the area, his adrenaline surging. "We can't keep running, Henry. What's the plan?" Henry hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small USB drive. "This contains everything: coordinates, schematics, contingency plans. It's a burden I can't carry anymore." Jack stared at the drive, his mind racing. "You're trusting me with this? Why?" Henry placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Because you've proven you care about doing the right thing, no matter the cost. The Beacon's power must never fall into the wrong hands." Before Jack could respond, headlights illuminated the yard. The mercenaries had found them. "This ends now," Henry said, his tone resolute. "I'll distract them. You need to get out of here and protect that drive." "No way," Jack countered. "I'm not leaving you behind." Henry smiled faintly. "You've already done more than I could have asked, but this is my fight." With that, Henry stepped into the open, drawing the mercenaries' attention. Jack hesitated for a heartbeat before retreating into the shadows, clutching the USB drive tightly. Gunfire erupted as Henry confronted the attackers, his movements deliberate despite his age. Jack heard the shouts, the bursts of gunfire, and then silence. By the time reinforcements arrived, the mercenaries were gone, and Henry's body lay still in the yard. Jack knelt beside him, a profound sense of loss washing over him. In Henry's hand was his pocket watch, its inscription glinting faintly under the moonlight. 2 weeks later, Jack stood in a government briefing room, presenting the contents of the USB drive to a team of high-ranking officials. The Beacon's existence was confirmed, but its secrets remained locked away, safe for now. As Jack left the room, he felt the weight of Henry's legacy on his shoulders. The old man's sacrifice had ensured that humanity's most dangerous secret stayed hidden. But Jack knew the fight wasn't over. Somewhere others would come searching, and he'd be ready. Henry Brooks, once a forgotten relic of history, had become a legend.